Well, good evening. I'll call the board meeting to order. Welcome. We welcome you to our regular board meeting for the Pasco School District Board of Directors. Just for your information, earlier today, 4:30, we had a study session where we talked about professional learning communities, had Dr. Cruz come in and talk about the work that's been going on in our district. And now we will have the flag salute. Principal Dora Noble with Rowena Chess Elementary.
Good evening, Board President Christensen, Superintendent Whitney, and members of the board. It is my honor to present you the students from our Rowena Chess robots teams. We have two of them. They have claimed the name the Chess Bots. This is the third year that we've had robotics at Rowena Chess. For the students that are here tonight, this is their first year participating in robotics. The coaches are Miss Olson, Miss McCormick, and Miss Piskel. The students will be coming down one at a time. Our robotics teams meet after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They compete twice a year, one of which is this Saturday. Their participation supports the district's outrageous outcomes of having 100% of students involved in extracurricular activities. In addition, the Lego Robotics encourages, promotes research, engineering, coding, and most of all, teamwork. All of these are which are skills that students will need in their future. They have come here together to lead you in the flag salute, so I'll call each of them by name. And then there's a special guest that would like to help us out with the flag salute, and his name is Savage Bot 2.0. So we have Isabella Perez, Aiden Lopez, Angel Cruz, Robert Gomez Suarez, Adam Alvarado, and Huberto Gomez Suarez, who is carrying Savage Bot 2.0. And if you would all stand, please. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Savage Bot 2.0, huh?
Says the pledge and everything.
Well, thank you. Is it Chess Bots?
Yes, these are the Chess Bots.
The Chess Bots. Thank you, Chess Bots, for coming and leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm guessing you didn't come today on robots. You probably had parents bring you. Is that correct? Could we get the parents to stand up or at least raise your hand so we can acknowledge our wonderful parents? All right, so we're going to get a picture here.
All right, ready? 3, 2, 1.
Well, thank you, students, for coming and sharing that with us. Good luck this weekend in your, is it a tournament? Your competition?
So can you walk up in front of us so we can see your robot?
Bring Savage Bot 2.0 up
Yeah,
here so
right.
we can see him.
And I love your chess shirts. They are really cool.
Cool.
Is that the pawn on your shirt there? All right. I know it's a night. I'll just see if I can get a response out of him. But
Very cool.
There.
Thank you.
thank you, young man. We appreciate that. Thank you, parents, for bringing your students and letting them join us tonight. Thank you, students.
Thank you.
All right, could we get a roll call, please? Present?
Present.
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 She's excused.
Present.
Present.
All right, thank you. Agenda review.
I would like to call the board's attention to two items highlighted in red under number 9A and B. I just wanted to clarify that the red is not representing a change to either of those agenda items, instead lending some specificity to what is included in those agenda items. You'll notice a resolution number, and also on both of the action items, I also wanted to remind the board that there is a budget extension hearing. That budget extension hearing has been advertised based on the requirements under the law for 2 weeks as a public hearing process. Oh, I'm sorry. And also, we will be requesting an executive session under 4231.10.1G for personnel, and it's a quarterly evaluation of the superintendent.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Whitney. All right, so moving on to special recognition, Mr. Shane Ettinger.
Well, good evening, Board President Christensen, Superintendent Whitney, and members of the board. May 6th through the 10th marks Teacher Appreciation Week here in the Pasco School District, and May 7th will be National Teacher Day. Activities and celebrations will be going on throughout the district to honor Pasco teachers that week. Tonight, though, we want to honor the Pasco teachers who have earned their National Board certification this school year. This advanced teaching credential is achieved upon successful completion of a voluntary assessment program designed to recognize effective and accomplished teachers who meet high standards based on what teachers should know and be able to do. As part of the certification process, candidates complete 10 assessments that are reviewed by trained teachers in their certificate areas. The assessments include 4 portfolio entries that feature teaching practice and 6 constructed response exercises that assess content knowledge. This year, 7 more Pasco teachers earned this prestigious certification, and Pasco currently has 106 National Board certified teachers. At this time, I'd like to ask Rebecca Schlegel to come to the podium. She is Pasco's National Board Certified Trainer. She's worked with these teachers through the National Board certification process. Rebecca.
Thank you. I had a few thoughts that I wanted to share with you so that you would know how National Board certification and facilitation has happened here in Pasco, and a little bit about how rigorous the process is that these ladies have gone through. So a little bit about myself. First, I certified in 2010 and was one of the first health National Board certificated teachers in the United States. In 2014, I took trainings that I needed to become an official OSPI facilitator because I saw a need in our school district at the time. And still, we had no official trained facilitators to help National Board candidates through the process. I've worked with 54 Pasco teachers starting in 2015. I've also worked with 2 Kennewick teachers, 2 Walla Walla teachers, and I even have one that drives from Dayton and one from Burbank to come to our cohort meetings. Not all of the teachers I've worked with have continued. On average, only 40% of teachers who set out to earn National Board certification actually finish the process and certify. So in Washington State, we currently have 10,859 National Board certified teachers, which is about 18% of our teaching force. The ladies that certified this last year are in the #1 group of certification for 2018. Washington State was #1 of all the states for the amount of candidates who were actually achieved National Board certification, and Washington State is #3 overall. Dr. Eric Jensen states that if a student has an excellent teacher for 5 straight years, the experiences of being in that classroom can completely negate the negative effects of poverty on learning. And with 68% of our students coming from households of poverty, having teachers continue the process of becoming nationally board certified teachers is an excellent way to directly impact student learning in our school district. So I'm very happy to be able to work with these ladies and gentlemen every Thursday night. And it's been a real pleasure and my honor.
Thank you, Rebecca. Don't go anywhere because I'm going to need your help to hand out these plaques. So, when I call your name, please come forward for a group photo. And as I mentioned, we have a plaque for you to hang on, or to hang in your classroom to celebrate and acknowledge this great accomplishment. So, our newest National Board Certified teachers are Renee Hanshu from Emerson Elementary, Jana Hardman from Longfellow Elementary, Laura Hendrickson from McGee Elementary, Angie Jarvis from Chiawana High School, Kelly Cruz from Chess Elementary, Wendy Pop Lefferts from Angelo Elementary, and Laura Rusendahl from Pasco High School. Congratulations to all of these teachers who have gone the extra mile to gain national certification.
All right, so we've got some, it's not a plaque, but it's a pen. So we're going to have our student reps come down and give you, present you a little token that we give to people who come and get recognized in our board meetings. And we'll get a picture too. So thank you, teachers, and congratulations in that journey. So this is the portion of our meeting. We open our meeting to audience comments. If there's anybody who has anything that they want to share with the board or say to the board, this is your opportunity. We'll give you 2 minutes. Any takers? Second call. Last call. All right. Moving on. Approval of minutes. So could we get a motion for the approval of minutes from our last meeting?
Mr. President, I move to approve the regular meeting minutes from March 26, 2019.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the regular meeting minutes of March 26, 2019. Could those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Consent agenda. So we've got personnel, we've got warrants, monthly budget report, 2019-20 Board of Directors meeting calendar, Resolution 975, Office of State Treasurer bus lease agreement, Resolution 976, Office of the State Treasurer bus lease loan reimbursement, Three Rivers Elementary School change order number 2, Resolution 974, intent to construct new middle school number 4, overnight student travel for Delta High School natural helpers to attend natural helpers training in Ellensburg, Washington, out-of-state and overnight travel for Pasco High School speech and debate student to attend National Speech and Debate Tournament in Dallas, Texas, out-of-state and overnight travel for Pasco High School drama students to attend the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in Ashland, Oregon, out-of-state travel for Rowena Chess Elementary 6th grade students to attend STEM experience at OMSI in Portland, Oregon, out-of-state travel for Chiawana High School Student Services Group to attend Discover Your Future at Eastern Oregon University in La Grande, Oregon, out-of-state and overnight student travel for Pasco High School DECA students to attend International Career Development Conference in Orlando, Florida, overnight travel for Chiawana High School FCCLA students to attend the May Executive Conference in Olympia, Washington, Out-of-state student travel for McLaughlin Middle School Choir to compete in the Best of the Northwest Choir Festival in Portland, Oregon. Overnight student travel for New Horizons High School FFA students to attend the Washington FFA State Convention in Pullman, Washington. And finally, overnight student travel for Pasco High School. Is that Mecha? I think that's Mecha. Yeah, Mecha, I think that's how you say it. M-E-C-H-A. Students to attend the Iskali Kalmakak Student Conference in Cheney, Washington. I'm sure I didn't say that right, but we'll go with that. So that is the consent agenda. Could we get a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. I think it's as presented, was it? Okay,
Yes.
very good. Thank you. Could we get a roll call, please?
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
Ms. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Richardson?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Ritter?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 9, we've got action items, beginning with action item A, Resolution 977, 2018-19 Budget Extension, Hearing and Adoption, Transportation Vehicle Fund. Mr. Kevin Hebden.
Good evening, President Christensen, members of the board, Superintendent Whitney. Happy to be before you tonight. Part of what was approved on the consent agenda is aligns with what we're doing here tonight as well. Before you is a request to extend our 2018-19 Transportation Vehicle Fund. Why do we need a budget extension? We're taking the opportunity or taking advantage of the opportunity of a Washington State Department of Ecology grant that gives us $525,000 to replace up to 15 buses. This has been a topic that we've discussed quite a bit, and hopefully we're all familiar with it. There's also a need exists to replace many buses that have exceeded their useful life. And the current budget that was approved at the beginning of the school year of $650,000 in the Transportation Vehicle Fund is not adequate to cover the purchase of the 15 buses. We've also had 3 insurance claim vehicles that needed to be replaced. Even though those are not additional expenditures as the insurance reimburses us, we, by law, are required to include that as part of our budgetary authority. And so that needs to be included in our budget considerations here. And then there's a small contingency for unforeseen events through the end of the school year. To break those out for us, the current budget is at $650,000. The 15 buses are about just over $2 million, and then the 3 replacements at $150,000 each. And then contingency would leave us if another bus were to go down. We have that authority, and then other small repairs to any buses or other vehicles throughout the district. So we would be extending the budget by $2.1 million for a total new budget, proposed budget of $2.75 million for the 2018-19 school year. Would turn that back to you as in reference before you on the desk is language around walking us through that public hearing process. As we have advertised, as Superintendent Whitney mentioned in the local paper, the details of this budget extension were also available on our website.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Hebden. Actually, is any questions from the board before we go to the public hearing? All right, very good. So, excuse me. I will now open the public hearing on the proposed budget extension of the 2018-19 Transportation Vehicle Fund. This hearing is an opportunity for any person to appear and be heard either for or against the budget extension. So, this time we'll open it up for any comments from the public. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this budget extension? Second call. Final call. All right. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Any further questions, or if none, we'll entertain a motion.
Mr. President, I move to approve resolution number 977, budget extension in the transportation vehicle fund of $2.1 million for a total approved budget of $2,750,000.
I'll second the motion.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve Resolution 977, which extends our expenditure limit for our transportation vehicle fund for the school year 2018-19 from $650,000 to $2,750,000. Any discussion? All right, could we get a roll call, please, Ms. Richardson?
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
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 Very good. So the resolution passes. All right, are you ready to go into action item B?
You bet. Thank you for
Resolution 970.
that. The next step to then pay for our buses that are on order is to request an interfund loan. Why do we need an interfund loan? To pay for the 15 buses on order. The general fund cannot pay for buses, and there is not adequate funding in the transportation vehicle fund at this time. So again, taking advantage of the Washington State Department of Transportation, Washington State Department of Ecology grant, and then an opportunity to update our buses. So this interfund loan will facilitate that. What does the loan look like? Funds will be transferred from the general fund in the amount up to $2.15 million to the transportation vehicle fund. And then the funds will be paid back. I should mention that the funds will be paid back by August 31st of 2019 with interest to close out the year. So it's a short-term loan from the general fund to the transportation vehicle fund. Funding will then come back to us in the form of the Office of the State Treasurer's grant, Office of the State Treasurer's local program that we were approved for, and then the $525,000 from the Department of Ecology grant.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hebden. Any questions for Mr. Hebden? Seeing none, could we get a motion, please? To approve Resolution 978.
Mr. President, I move to approve Resolution number 978, an interfund loan from the general fund to the transportation vehicle fund in a not-to-exceed amount of $2.15 million to pay for 15 Thomas Bus school buses.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve Resolution 978, an interfund loan from the general fund to the transportation vehicle fund in the amount of $2.15 million to pay for 15 buses. So, any discussion? Seeing none, could we get a roll call, please?
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
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 All right. Thank you, Mr. Hebden. Does that conclude the business for tonight?
I believe so for now. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 10, we've got reports, and we're starting off with a STEM audit report.
So as Assistant Superintendent Bowles makes his way to the podium, I believe he also has a co-presenter tonight in Executive or Director Megan Nelson. I wanted to call the board's attention to a document that's in front of you. You have a copy of the full STEM audit that was completed by Hanover Research. Eric and Megan are here tonight to provide a broad or just a really high-level overview. Certainly, as district staff, we are always prepared to dig into any of the full audit that the board would appreciate additional information about. And with that, I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Bowles.
Good evening, Board President Christensen, Superintendent Whitney, and members of the board. Adjust this a little bit so I don't lean all the way over it. As you may or may not be aware, we've been working for a little bit more than the last year in partnership with Hanover Research to take a look at our STEM programs at our 5 elementary schools overall, and we really used basically 4 guiding questions to frame the work. First being, how do teachers and administrators experience the implementation of STEM units? How do teachers and administrators perceive the STEM program's effectiveness in reaching its goals? How are teachers and administrators currently using program materials and supports? And probably the most important question, how are students doing? So you may be wondering already about wider staff, family, and student input, and we'll be capturing that data through our longtime relationship with the Center for Educational Effectiveness, as it was more cost-effective to look at that particular solution and to also be able to examine the work longitudinally thanks to our long-term relationship with CEE.
And just for clarification to the board, that window is open right now, and so when that window closes, we'll be able to provide the most recent data from the Center for Educational Effectiveness.
So the good news is there was a lot of good news in the report, and I'll just highlight a couple of the kind of key items here contained in the bullets. STEM integration has been positive for teachers and students. Cross-disciplinary connections are abundant, and students love the hands-on experience. We also see some good news in that, and I'll speak to this a little bit later in the presentation, but we see some good news in the overall performance data, both in our STEM schools and in our other schools, elementary schools, I should say, and I think what I'll speak to really is buttressed by the study session that you heard tonight. We're seeing some really good early returns on our investments, and I think the work led by Carla Lobos with Dr. Cruz it's very difficult, as we talked about in the study session, to infer causation for much of anything in education, but I really do believe the work that we're seeing across the board is having an impact, and I'll speak to that just a little bit later. I'm going to turn the next slide over with regard to recommendations to my colleague, Megan Nelson, who's done a great job with the STEM initiative and is also helping us out at Franklin Elementary and doing a really nice job there. I appreciate working with Megan every day, and she's going to walk through the recommendations pieces and expand a little bit on what we're doing in light of the recommendations. I was able to meet with Megan, go through the report, and Megan has met with Jaime Morales, our principal at McClintock STEM Elementary. And the consensus so far is there's really nothing in here that was surprising to us, so we'll be able to share a little bit about what we're doing in terms of moving forward in response. So, Megan, have at it.
Evening, everyone. So we have a couple recommendations, as you can see up here. Our first one is continuing to integrate adopted ELA standards and materials into our STEM plans. The goal of our STEM plans has always been to align those plans to the PCG plans in the content area, so they are of the same quality and expectations as all the other schools are being held to within the PCG plans. So we are continuing to work to integrate ELA into those plans because ELA is the bulk of the work with the integration. So that is something that we're constantly working on with the teachers and the teams who the teams who work on the ELA plans. The other is to provide regular vertical and cross-school collaboration. So there's two things with that one we have within the STEM school realm, where we'll be meeting with the STEM school principals to create a plan for the upcoming school year to provide opportunities for grade level teams to get together. So all the 5th grade teams across the STEM schools, all the 4th grade teams get together to talk about the plans, how they're going, what they believe needs to be changed or adapted based on how things worked or didn't work. And we want to make sure that those are structured into the school year next year, so they're happening at a more regular pace for teachers to get together and talk about how that's happening. The other piece is the STEM piece across the school district and how we're supporting the school collaboration, and one of the pieces that we have been working on this year are our Hallmark experiences. So at the STEM level, we identified Hallmark experiences that kids are getting at every grade level, and that we would be able to take those lessons and activities and interactions to every other school and give them those same opportunities. So we've been working on making that happen, and we're going to continue to work on broadening that and training more teachers into next year as well. The third bullet, promoting the consistency of the STEM program, that actually had 3 subsections to this recommendation. One being that ensuring that all administrators and staff at STEM schools are aware of program goals and implementation expectations. With teachers coming in new, teachers changing buildings, we need to make sure that we are being very cognizant of bringing those teachers on to what it means to work in a STEM school and what it means to be a STEM teacher and what that looks like. The other is minimizing changes to the curriculum guides. As it was spoken of before at the study session, bringing curriculum on, we had to integrate all the new curriculum into the STEM plans, and so we had a lot of changes happening for a while, but that's really settled down this year. This is, I think, the first year we haven't had 5 or 6 meetings all week with all the different grade levels trying to make adjustments as things were changed. This has been a very stabilized year. The third would be developing a standardized framework to guide evaluations of the STEM programming. Our goal has been to bring those same teams who have developed the plans together to hold the STEM plans up to the EQUIP rubric, which is what we use to evaluate our science curriculum that we just purchased for our elementary. And so we are planning on doing that as well, since all of the plans were built through the lens of science. And the fourth, providing annual PD for STEM teachers. We're going to get together with the STEM school principals to determine what that needs to look like for next year. So we have a plan laid out for them. But then there's also another layer of what we offer, and I think you got a booklet from Mrs. Lobos today during the STEM, or the meeting you had before, on all the STEM PD that we provide. So we have 2 layers there for STEM teachers. The first one being what they need to be a STEM teacher in a STEM school. The second being what is STEM and how to implement STEM and what does that mean for their instruction. Okay, thanks. You're back.
And I'm back. So the latter part of the report really focuses on several interesting looks in terms of how our students are performing in general. And so what we're seeing, and I'll speak to this in a little bit more detail here, what we're seeing is we're seeing some really great initial growth trends across our elementary school population. And so just a handful of the data celebrations. We see our students in Pasco, when you look at 2017, 2018 Smarter Balanced Assessment results, we see our students performing in the aggregate north of the 54th percentile and 52nd percentile in English language arts and math. And what that means, I really like the student growth percentile metric. I'm going to try to speak to this in a way that just makes total sense. We typically look at, when we see reports of how districts are doing in the newspapers, we look at the percentage of kids meeting standard. And, you know, some of us might argue that that line for standard is somewhat arbitrary. If we don't necessarily scratch under the data, you could be in a very affluent school and we could have kids meeting standard, but we could actually see them regressing toward the mean over time. So when we look just at whether kids meet standard or whether kids don't meet standard, it can be a little bit misleading. What's really nice about the student growth percentile piece is it really allows us to look at how kids are performing apples to apples. So any kid who is at the 50th student growth percentile or north is making expected or better than expected growth when compared to their peers. So it's a great way to really look at how are all students performing compared to their like peers. And the news in Pasco is pretty good. I also want to speak to the state looks at another category. They talk about high growth for student growth percentiles, and they identify that in the state of Washington as anybody with a student growth percentile score of 66 or higher. We have a very high percentage of kids in Pasco, and it's embedded in the data at our elementaries who hit that high growth criterion. So to see kids making significantly better than expected growth is another celebration. The report specifically called out Marie Curie STEM Elementary for being a school that had very high student growth percentile among our STEM sites. So the individual students making those types of gains. This is really consistent with what we've seen this year in our internal assessment measures. Mark presented recently on our metrics targets and stretch targets, and we saw a lot of schools at grade levels approaching, if not exceeding those targets fall to winter, when it's really a fall to spring measure. And then the number of schools that we've seen reduce in this iteration of school improvement status, again, is a significant, I think, positive indicator for how our students are starting to trend in Pasco. So I think across the board, good news with our STEM schools. It was a nice benefit of the report was really good news for our elementary schools in terms of really starting to see some great academic achievement. Again, I think that ties directly to the work that was showcased in the study session as much as probably anything else. And with that, thank you. And Megan and I won't leave until we've sufficiently answered what questions you may have.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Bowles and Mrs. Nelson. Appreciate you coming and sharing that information with us. So now, board members, it's your turn to ask questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I hadn't had a chance to fully digest this Hanover research packet, but Mr. Bowles talked to me a little bit about it before, or sorry, Eric talked to me a little bit about it before this meeting. So a question that I have had, and I think a lot of the community's asked in the past is, are students performing better at the STEM schools or at the traditional schools? And I think what I get from this report is, you said that demographics might play a bigger role in that than STEM versus traditional schools, and that we're doing well at all of our schools or many of our schools. So a question that I'd like to further explore in the future, not an answer for today, is when community members or parents, a lot of them really like the STEM, the full-on STEM immersion, and some may or may not like it. And at this point, there is a lottery, right, for some kids to get into it, but the majority of students are in there based on what some might call an educational lottery based on where you live. So just going forward, again, I know there's not an answer now. How would we respond to the parents that say, well, STEM schools and traditional schools both perform equitably in annual growth and in passing state standards? It should be a student choice or a family choice type school. What is our response to them going forward? And again, I know you don't have an answer right now, but something for the district and the board to think of.
Yeah, we've been really looking forward to this audit because I think it's really important that we evaluate our programs for effectiveness across the board. If we're going to implement something, then we need to make sure that what we're implementing is effective. We've seen some incredible things happen out of Delta High School. Scores have really improved there, and they score on average above, I believe, all the high schools are close to, or as close to the top anyway. And for the demographics of Delta, that's phenomenal. And we wondered if this elementary school was going to see numbers like this. So all I understood from this, though, is that Pasco's making growth across the board in all areas, but we don't have enough data because demographics play such a part. Is there any way to disaggregate data enough and demographics enough to compare? Because I believe it's really important that we compare our STEM schools, the growth at our STEM schools with other schools with similar demographics, just to see how our STEM schools are measuring up to the growth in other schools with similar demographics. So I feel like that's really important to judge the effectiveness and maybe even survey other schools to see how much they enjoy their curriculum. So yeah, I still have a lot more questions with this data, and so I was hoping to get more information out of this data, and I wondered if that's possible to get it or if it's impossible.
So let me see if I can restate what I believe might have been two questions. And the first had to do with the interpretation in the report that schools are performing relatively the same. I don't think that's what the report said exactly. The way I interpreted the report was what they looked at was they they took the Pasco elementary schools and averaged the schools by free and reduced, and schools that fell on one side of that average versus the other. They really tried to control for how are students doing in terms of the number of students who are meeting standard. So they answered the question that way. And we see that our more affluent schools tend to have students who are meeting standard on our state test at a higher level. Then they looked at the same information in terms of student growth percentiles. So in our schools across Pasco, STEM and otherwise, were students making expected or better than expected growth over time? And what was promising about that was, regardless of the demographic, we see wherever kids start in Pasco, they seem to be making a year's growth and change in a year's time, which is what we want. With regard to the question of how can we drill into that, it really ties back to the metrics that Mark has put together around goals and stretch goals. So when we look inside of that data, each building has their own individualized goals, and that is based on a comparative look at like schools across the state. So the target goal is you would be expected. You'd be right in the middle of that band. So if we're looking at 10 schools that look like you, so we can do this. The short answer to your question is yes, we can do this now for our STEM and other schools, and it's already baked into our metrics that Mark has worked with. The stretch targets would be in the top quartile. So any school who meets their stretch target would be performing against peer schools in that top quartile. So I believe we have the ability to look at that now.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'll have to dig into the report more fully. I know one common concern that I've heard in the last couple of years has to do with our reading ELA performance at the STEM schools, with the more of a focus on science and math. I've heard from many people, including staff, that that's a concern. How are our students performing ELA-wise? And so at first glance, the Hanover report does separate the schools like with like. It has Franklin, McClintock, Markham, Livingston, Angelo, McGee together, and then it has Curie and Captain Gray kind of with other like demographic schools. So they do try to separate that, and just at first glance, it looks like there may be some opportunities to address that with the reading standards, math standards, and actually separates the achievement meeting standard and the growth, so it has it separated out. So I'd love to dig into that a little bit more and see if there's some opportunities for growth there where we can address that, because it looks like that concern may have some validity. A couple other questions I have relate to kind of the STEM offerings throughout the district. One challenge we've had is we have Delta High School, and we have a huge number of students that would like to go there from Pasco that are not able to go there, and we really don't have another opportunity for that. We are trying to expand those offerings, it sounds like, at the high schools and at the middle school level, but that's a big concern of mine, that we're have all these schools where we're focusing on STEM, and then those students don't really have, or any student have the same opportunity in middle and high school. And so it seems to me that we should, kind of approach that and have that's when they really need the more, those opportunities. So that's something I'd like to see addressed. The STEM hallmark experiences at other schools, so is that kind of our way of kind of extending the principles to other schools without converting other schools to become STEM schools? I'm sure people are aware now that so our new elementary schools are not going to be STEM schools. So could you comment on that and kind of the effort to either expand that and what we're doing at the secondary level? I'd personally love to see another STEM school that we had just in our district for high school, because we have the desire, the interest, and I feel that that's an equity issue that we're not meeting in our community, where the interest has been there now for many years.
And I'm not trying to pass the buck, but I'm gonna go ahead and let Megan address those two questions, because I think she can speak eloquently day to day with regard to both the elementary and some of the STEM pathway offerings at our high schools.
Absolutely no pressure. Okay. As far as the Hallmark experience, the goal of those is so the teams identified, one example that always pops to mind is they dissect frogs at 3rd grade. That's aligned to their standards, and they have a whole section of a unit that they do around the Hallmark experiences. So the goal was to take that larger unit and package it into some lessons with that activity in mind, so the teachers could take it and do the same kind of hands-on STEM activity with their kids within the unit that those standards meet. And so that is the objective. And so we've identified one at each grade level level to start with to instruct teachers on and give them the opportunity to do that. It's not something we're telling them they have to do, but here's an opportunity to do this as what the other what the other schools are doing as well. One of the things that we're working on, and we have, I don't know if you guys know, we have science/STEM fellows at every building who are currently engaged with the ESD, and their work is to be their science representative for the building, to go to the ESD, get trained from the state level on all things science, all things STEM, and be able to bring back and share that with their teachers. Now, that's just one layer of what we're trying to do. The other piece that we have that we're working on is a STEM equity map. So I have this document that we're working towards where we have lined out every school, what they're doing, what initiatives they have at the elementary, what schools those schools feed into, what offerings are there for the elementary kids to take parts of, and then how those kids feed up into the high school and what offerings are at the high schools for those kids to take advantage of as well. So showing them a path, should they choose, to continue to follow. Now, we have a lot of room to increase that. There's lots of other opportunities to increase at the middle school and the high school, as well as the elementary. So we have a nice start, a good foundation, but that is definitely a work that we are going to be focusing on in the future.
So let me say thank you for the presentation as well. It sounds like our STEM schools are performing at the level that we would expect, comparable to other schools. Is that a fair
I think that's a
assessment?
very fair general assessment.
Okay. And I find it interesting, have found it interesting that we have 4 STEM schools that we put the label STEM on. And, but basically, I believe that those are neighborhood schools. I mean, if you live in that neighborhood, you're going to go to that school. How different really is the education at a STEM school versus a normal school? Is it considerably different? I mean, I think I heard you talk about we get STEM school teachers and administrators together. We talk about a consistent STEM program between schools, but I've always found it interesting that we have some STEM schools and we have some that are regular schools, and that, again, maybe this is getting into what Scott was talking about, where you're not prepared to answer it, but I find that interesting that we have that. And
It's a fair question, and I think I can provide a decent general answer, and then Megan can jump on board. And again, I would just tie back to what we saw in the study session. The work of the PLCs is really the engine that we know makes schools run. I think we're starting to really see some evidence on the surface of at least 3 different data points that we're making some progress in that regard. The instructional materials that we select, whether they're heavy STEM or more traditional, many other school systems have other additional magnet options, are really more, so I think of the PLCs and ultimately work in response to intervention as really the engine that drives the car, and then the frame of the car, really equates to what we pick in terms of that instructional approach. But it's that, I think, relentless understanding of standards, the common formative assessments, and the willingness to share the accountability for all kids, regardless of what instructional materials we choose, that ultimately I think makes the difference, not only in Pasco, but in other school systems. And anything you want to add, Megan? No pressure. Of course. Yeah.
So I think one of the things that you'll find that's different at the STEM schools is the level of integration. Now, there is integration happening fabulously across the district at other schools, but the objective of the STEM schools is to integrate as much as possible. So when you're studying a topic, you don't leave that topic just because you move to math. You don't leave that topic just because you move to science. So that is the objective of the STEM schools. Now, at the lower grades, it's kind of like a funnel. The K1, 2, you're going to find more separate content areas just because they're learning to do things. And at the upper grade levels is where the integration becomes more explicit, because they're able to take and apply instead. So that's where you're going to see the difference. But there is some fabulous integration happening across the district too, where teachers are doing this as well.
so I guess the thing so the good news is everybody's getting a good education.
Correct.
Whether you're at a STEM school or at what we would call a traditional school. I'm not sure this is fair, but there doesn't appear to be a distinguishable difference between them. I mean, different forms of learning,
Yep.
different approaches.
Different forms of learning. I would say that there's a lot more, and again, I'm generalizing because there are some fabulous things happening in other schools too. There's a lot more hands-on. There's a lot more at earlier grade levels. It's a lot more student-led hands-on than it is teacher-led hands-on because of the application of STEM. One of the things that we talked about when I considered that question too was we see a lot of exposure to careers across the STEM schools where they're having engineers, scientists, doctors earlier and earlier with the kids coming, and they talk about careers all the time. So they're connecting those pathways for kids. So there are some branches that are different, but
Well,
yeah.
it just seems to me like we either, there's no data that says we need to do this to the rest of our schools yet, nor that we need to shut them down.
Correct.
Or go back to traditional. So given that, and given that people learn differently, I think this goes back to why do we call these STEM? I mean, different approaches. If we're going to call them STEM and the approach is different, we do have the option for people to opt into those schools. Is that correct?
My understanding, and again, the decision around STEM education was prior to me being in this role, and I was not in a role that was attached to that decision-making at the time at the district office. My understanding was the hope and the vision and the goal would be that those STEM schools had opt-in slots. That has not been a reality for us because of the kind of immense growth of our community. That could be a reality for us in the future, and I think one that we would all like to work toward. So there was some flexibility for our parents who don't have a STEM boundary school that would like their students to have that experience. So I think we would like to explore what that could look like. And my belief is that was the original intent of identifying STEM schools. You have you have some, they're kind of regional. You have your McClintock, Franklin, West, you have Central, Captain Gray, and East, Curie, Whittier. So I think the original intent was to have a regional STEM school that people could opt into. The reality of our growth didn't allow for that to last very long. Sure. I seem to recall there was a handful of opt-ins kind of at the beginning, and then that phased out over time because of the growth of the neighboring community around the school. So that's definitely a thing that we could look at as we continue to add elementaries to our inventory, and especially as we look at serving our sixth graders on our elementary or our middle school campus, could offer us some opportunity and flexibility there differently than what we've had in the past.
Yeah, I just find it interesting, and I'm not sure that there's a lot of parents that are clamoring to get their kids into a STEM school. I mean, apparently it doesn't make significant difference. In general, there might be when you get down to the individual child, but I do appreciate the report, and I think longer-term data will maybe show some more that we haven't seen yet, but I'm glad we did this, and I would expect we'll continue to follow that and see what long-term results come from it, so thank you.
I thought the opt-in was at the beginning of when the schools opened. We had opt-in spaces for a specific number of students to opt in when we opened Franklin and we opened Curry. But I didn't think there was an opt-in for all schools all the time.
It just is an interesting thing.
This is one of the areas where I would defer to the board's kind of collective recollection, because I really wasn't in a spot where I could tell you what the philosophy or the vision was. So in some ways, we're trying to recreate the history of how we got here and then envision a new future together. So certainly, even if that wasn't the initial intent to have opt-in spots, if we wanted to explore that as a potential opportunity for our community, I think certainly we could do that based on direction from the board. So, I think this is an area where we collect more information. We're happy to come back to the board with some of the pieces that you've asked we can dig into, and then we make sense of this together as we continue to move forward with our long-term facilities planning. The point in which we add new elementaries to our inventory might be another opportunity to have a conversation about which programs do we explore and expand or explore expansion of. We've talked about two-way, we've talked about STEM, so really looking at expansion of specialized programs through the lens of kind of everything that's available to consider So it definitely is a work that we can do in collaboration moving forward.
Another question, and again, just got this report, so I haven't had a chance to go through it, so maybe it's in there, maybe it's not. Was anything said about equity with regards to how we've set up who gets into STEM schools and who doesn't?
We didn't frame any questions when we partnered with Hanover around boundaries or enrollment.
I know I'm not ready to create more opt-ins. I want to see more of how successful this is, and I liked what what was his name that was here before?
Dr. Cruz?
Dr. Cruz. I really liked one of the things he said, and sometimes we go in, we find something, we tweak it, and then we make it better. From the, these are my two favorite things. I'm obviously a mathematician, but these two areas of data, and to me, from what I look at, sometimes the STEM schools were 10% lower in some of the things in there, in math or English with schools that of related demographics. Marie Curie was consistently higher. The rest were lower or the same-ish, from what I can tell. I think we need more time to do this, but it's obviously not something that's going to, crash these numbers out of the water, but it might be too early. Anyway, I think when we try something new like this, we do it with a few schools. We see if it works, and then we adjust. And I think that's still where we're at. And it seems like the recommendation right here is to continue forward with this, which I think is great, because I think it's early and it takes a while for things to get off the ground. But from what I see, it seems like they're overall performing somewhat lower.
Is the Livingston data in with the Curie data in this report that we're seeing here? Whittier.
The reason we don't see the Whittier data at the back is we analyze third grade and beyond state assessment data, and Whittier doesn't have any kids taking the state assessment. So by proxy, I would say yes if you think about Curie.
So is all of this third through sixth grade then?
Yeah, that's the data that we had Hanover take a look at.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, well, thank you. So I think we'll probably come back with a discussion on this as a board sometime, talk about STEM, and maybe we can recreate what we've thought we intended in the beginning or set direction going forward. So I appreciate the report, and thanks for the information.
Thank you.
All right. Second report, middle school number 4 naming recommendations.
So it's my pleasure to invite Mrs. Robin Hay to the podium. I just wanted to remind the board, Ms. Hay has been serving our district in the capacity of planning principal. She was initially hired to do elementary planning for 16 and 17, of which she has taken on full force. She will be the principal of 17 when it opens. In the interim, there has been aspects of the process around middle school 4 that have needed to be tackled, and because Robin is who she is, she rolled up her sleeve and took on this process for us because, again, she is who she is. It was a job that needed done, and she said, I can do it. So she's here in her role as elementary planning principal, walking us through a naming process and recommendation of which she led. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Board President Christensen, Superintendent Whitney, and members of the board. It is my pleasure to present on the process and recommendations for naming middle school 4. Tonight, I will be presenting 5 names to the school board for consideration. I will come back to you at the May 14th meeting requesting action. This presentation will make you familiar with the process that was followed in soliciting nominations from student, staff, parents, and community members to name our new school. It will show you how members for the naming committee were invited, share the process that the committee used to narrow the selection of names, give you as the board an opportunity to ask questions and engage in discussion. In mid-January, an invitation was added to the Pasco School District website to request nominations for names for our new middle school. Our staff, students, and constituents were informed of this via social media post, the webpage itself, and our PSD app. Suggestions were gathered through the use of Google Docs. You can see that there were many submissions. Some names were submitted several times. I vetted each of the submissions before presenting them to the committee. In mid-February, a similar invitation to participate went out to the public for members of the naming committee. It was again accessible on our district webpage and advertised in a similar manner. 11 people expressed an interest and were invited to the naming committee meeting. However, of those 11, 5 were able to attend the meeting. The submissions were organized into 3 broad categories as indicated in board policy. Each submission was printed and affixed to boards for the committee's viewing and use. There were a wide variety of names submitted, from locally and nationally known persons to geographical landmarks that are familiar to our area. I have invited the members of the naming committee here this evening, and I would like to introduce them. They took the task very seriously, asked good questions, and were dedicated to selecting names that met the criteria as set out in board policy. Here tonight we have the following committee members, and I would just ask you to stand when I announce your name, and thank you for your participation and service. I know that we have Whitney Billman here and Angie Sessions. And I think that's everybody who was able to attend tonight. There were a couple of people who had accepted and had events come up and had to decline, but thank you guys very much for your participation.
Can you tell us, so we can recognize the names of the other people?
Certainly. We had Wendy Weber, Michaela Charles Dorndorf. So as our meeting began, each member was given a list of submissions with the reason why they were submitted for the middle school. The committee worked through a question and answer process and multiple rounds of prioritization to narrow the names. Those names are being placed before you this evening. Earlier I placed a sheet with each of the names and a short biography on them. We are bringing forward this list of 5 names: Willetta Mae Burns, Ray Reynolds, Trooper James Saunders, Juniper, and Cesar Chavez. Sorry. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you this evening. Are there any questions that I may answer for you? I'm happy to provide any additional information.
So just for the board's clarification, there is in front of you a document that outlines a short biography of each of the names that were just provided, so you have kind of a rationale or some facts about each of the names that were submitted. And I'd also like to recognize Whitney Billman. You may recognize her. She was part of our last naming process, so she signed up for naming process 2.0. I think that deserved a special recognition.
I'm just nosy.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Hay, and thank you to those who participated, Mrs. Sessions and Mrs. Bowman. Appreciate you coming tonight. This is one of those things that it's hard to get to. You name a name, you choose a name, and it's there for a long time. So we want to make sure that we get it right if we can, if there is such a thing as get it right, but choose one that will represent that school and our community well. So we appreciate you doing that work and vetting these names and making these recommendations. So, board members, any discussion on these names? Any questions for Mrs. Hay?
Thank you, Ms. Hay, and thank you, committee. I had a question. Is Major General Ray Reynolds, is he still, is he passed away or is he still living?
He is deceased. He was my assistant principal when I attended Pasco High.
So, does anybody, where does the name McLaughlin come from? Was
I
he
believe
an
both
educator?
John McLaughlin and Isaac Stevens were maybe governors of our territory. They are from that era.
Okay. So, all right, fair enough. So, board members, any questions? Any discussion? So it doesn't look like we have any questions or discussion. So next board meeting, we will plan on selecting a name and.
And if I can provide anything for you in the meantime, please let Ms. Whitney know, and I will get information for you.
Very good. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. Okay, now we're moving. Oh, that is a. Yeah, so does anybody from the audience want to make a comment either on our STEM audit or on our middle school naming? This is an opportunity for you to share your thoughts with us. All right, seeing none. We'll move on to our extended study portion of our meeting. Looks like we've got McCleary implementation report and prototypical school funding model. Mrs. Whitney.
So, Board President, Christian, members of the board, it's my honor to co-present a budget presentation this evening with my friend and colleague, Kevin Hebden. My part really has to do with the McCleary implementation and what we know today. Before I get started, however, I would like to call your attention to my T-shirt, which is in honor and recognition and acknowledgement of ASL Awareness Day, which was on April 15th. I was invited to attend the event and wear my T-shirt in a picture, and I could not go. So I thought, what better than to wear it at the board meeting tonight in honor of our program and Mrs. Havers, who's here this evening. So thank you for the T-shirt and the invitation. And I asked if I could be photoshopped into the picture, and I got an affirmative. So that is the plan. So. Again, I am here tonight to deliver really what is going to be a high-level overview of what we know right now about the implications of the McCleary decision on our 1920 budget planning process, and we will be requesting some direction from the board. What we are not prepared to do with the board today is to discuss or determine where any of the budget adjustments will be made or need to be made. I think the biggest piece for you to know and understand about our sharing information tonight is that we are really in a fluid and dynamic situation as it applies to responding to the McCleary decision, and we will remain in this kind of dynamic state until the state legislature concludes their session. Their regular session is scheduled to conclude April 28th. We're getting indication that that's not likely. Even if they were to conclude on April 28th, OSPI takes 2 to 3 weeks to develop the appropriate tools and mechanisms for us to use to identify how those impacts are applied to our budget process. And then once district staff gets those tools, it takes a week or two for them to run our specific numbers through that process. So we felt very compelled to be in front of you tonight to discuss what we know right now, due to the local, regional, and statewide context that the media has really created some uncertainty for our employees. Both, most days you open my Twitter feed or you read the Tri-State Herald or a local or regional or statewide newspaper, and there's articles that are really creating questions for our employees. So we wanted to balance our desire to be transparent and collaborative with the dynamic nature of our current statewide situation. And really, we're standing on a shifting landscape. So we want to proactively communicate what we know when we know it, engage the board and employees in the short term, and then in the longer term, engage the broader community through our budget planning process. The information I share with you will undoubtedly change. And so, again, our preference has always been to wait to share information until we're definitively 100% sure, or as sure as we can be. The nature of this particular budget planning process really requires us to be in front of you in advance of that. So our fiscal picture is there on the under the revenue tab. I'm trying to quickly, is that your right, my right, your left, my, okay, anyway, under the revenue tag there, it shows our budget revenue picture for this year and then the next 2 years. We're at about a $257 million budget this year, and then looking into the next 2 years, the budget revenue is $252.5, and then going back up then to $257.5. So the impact, what's impacting us in the kind of the whole budget picture is some changes to the way levy funding is administered to the district, and even what we could ask our taxpayers for. The cost of doing business is different, and then our school employee benefits are changing, and then there's some uncertainty around K-3 class size compliance. So I'll go into all of those a little bit more deeply. So the state changed the laws around how much we can go out and ask our community for. We used to levy $4.32 per thousand for our maintenance and operations levy. It has been changed by the state in the last legislative session to cap at $1.50 for what's now called an enrichment levy. We're very grateful to our community who 2 years ago approved a levy for 4 years at that $1.50, and our community's been very generous with us as a district in supporting us in our passing of our levies, which are to support our learning programs. The cost of doing business for industries really hands across industries has changed and is dynamic. Those of us who are currently in the housing market know and understand that differently. I think about, I first started driving, I paid 99 cents a gallon for gas. I think the last time I gassed up, gas was like $3.42 or something. So just the cost of living has changed, and that has impacted education. We have been buffered for that for many years, but that landscape is shifting for us. For us, the increases in the cost of doing business is about $4 million. School employee benefits is changing. Not only how benefits are administered is changing, the dollars that that is allocated for and paid out for each staff member has increased from about $900 to a little over $1,000. And who qualifies for benefits have changed. So more people qualify for benefits, and the benefits are costing more. So that increase is about $3.5 million. And then there's just some real uncertainty around K-3 class size compliance. So in the past, there's been a target for reduction in K-3 class sizes. The legislature has suspended in the past compliance to that, so we were awarded those dollars through the revenue process, whether we met the ratio or not. Next year, under the current, if the current law doesn't change, we'll be required to comply with the K-3 class size reduction number to generate the revenue. We, at this point, are partially complying, which would mean we would get a prorated allocation. So for us, that would be it would be a potential reduction of about $1 to $2 million, depending on how close we could get to that K-3 class size reduction target number of 17. So, given that, it gives us an opportunity to look at our budget differently than we have in the past. And so we've identified some approaches to making these budget adjustments over time. Our goal is to protect people. Our goal is that that we're not in a position to currently be laying off employees, that In this year's budget planning process, we're protecting people's positions. We're also protecting programs. We're not in a position under this budget planning process to be eliminating full-scale programs. We may need to look at our programs differently and get very efficient in the way we run them and the way that we fund them. And I think the study session is an excellent example of that. Dr. Cruz comes to us. He pushes in to times of the school day when job-embedded professional development can happen for our teachers, which would save us. And then we're also building capacity in our teachers so that we can eventually lead our own work with our own teacher leaders, and we're not bringing in a Dr. Cruz or Maria Nilsson. Their goal is to work themselves out of a job because we've built the capacity within our own organization to support that large-scale initiative. So that approach saves us sending people all over to trainings, and then it also the professional development is happening during the school day, which reduces extra duty pay, for example. And then over time, our goal is that we have built the capacity within our own leadership that we can support the initiatives ourselves. We wouldn't need the support of a consultant. So that's an example of how we get really efficient about the way we use our budget dollars and at the same time protect programs. So we would still be able to continue our focus on PLCs in a way that's budgetarily efficient. Our plan is to adjust spending farthest away from students with a reduction or a significant reduction of adult travel, especially for those of us who are furthest away from the kids. As superintendent, if I have to prioritize myself going to a national conference or a teacher going, those positions closest to children should be the ones that we should be considering offering those opportunities. Next year would be a good year for us to focus on implementing the initiatives that we have studied over the last 3 years and getting really focused there. We're also adjusting the way that we purchase food for adult meetings and trainings. We, an initial kind of back of the envelope estimation estimated about $500,000 last year was spent on food in this organization for meetings. So when you're looking at where we can build in budgetary efficiency so that you can protect programs and people, something like there is nothing in my mind more nurturing and more generous than sharing food with people. But when you're in a position like this, something that we have loved to do as an organization, we just have to look at differently. So, and again, I gave an example of loosely gave the example that fits with the bullet around narrowing our focus of our core programs. We will not be implementing anything new, a new program next year. So you won't hear a new big, we're bringing in something you've never heard of. That will not be happening in 1920. However, we will be supporting ongoing work in a thoughtful and intentional method with an eye on budgetary efficiency. And again, the example I gave with PLCs is exactly that. We'll be able to support that work in a way that's budgetarily efficient. This is our stakeholder engagement plan. I have met with PAE leadership. I met with them on the 17th. I actually met with PSE leadership this morning. Other union leadership meetings are pending, scheduled. We're working on getting those scheduled. Principals and district office admin met on Monday. I'm meeting with you this evening, and then you can see there that school sites, that those presentations actually started this morning. I did my first one at McLaughlin Middle School. My goal is to get to every school by the end of May. We are also planning opportunities to meet with classified nutrition services, maintenance and custodial, and et cetera. So making sure that we hit all of our employee groups in those meetings. Again, we're working on getting those scheduled. And as I mentioned, our goal would be to communicate and engage our community in May, June, and July, and August through the regular board planning process that includes public comment and so forth, but then also some strategic planning or strategic communication once things are more dialed in and details are known. So the goal of this stakeholder engagement plan is twofold. One, to share information about where we currently are. What do we know? This is what we know right now. And also to ask the stakeholder groups that are represented in this engagement plan to help us with thinking through ideas for how we might make this budget adjustment. So the last slide of my presentation is what ideas do you have for me to consider as we make these budget adjustments. So it's not just me going out and sharing information, but it's to engage in a collaboration collaborative process about how we'll work through this opportunity to do some budget adjustments, and we're going to work through that together as an organization. So in the spirit of working together, this is also an opportunity for you as a board to weigh in around, in addition to the approaches that I outlined, what other approaches would you like us to consider, or thoughts that you have, lenses you would like us to view the budget adjustment process through. We would love to hear that discussion from you as a board and integrate your thinking in to our approaches as we move forward.
So thank you, Mrs. Whitney. So board members, this is our opportunity to discuss and provide any direction. Does anybody, first of all, anybody have any questions for Mrs. Whitney? All right.
You know, I have a question really quickly. Just about the cost of doing business. I'm assuming the cost of doing business is inflation, would be one of the costs, and then the growth in the district. Is that one of the costs as well of doing business? What are some more specifics on that? That's kind of a vague over.
So one of the major costs of the increased cost in the way that we do business is our teacher pay, benefits, employee pay and benefits. And when I say benefits, I'm not talking about medical benefits. I'm talking about things like FICA, Medi, et cetera. So that's one of the major impacts that is captured in the cost of doing business.
Okay.
I did also leave out, and I apologize, I did send an all-staff email today outlining a really, really high-level kind of approach around how we're doing budget adjustments, and letting people know that I would be coming out to do presentations. And I've received a handful of emails back from staff already thanking the district for sharing information and us being proactive in our communication strategy. So that email did go out this afternoon. So as board members, you may be aware or not. But so it'll be a while before, like I went to McLaughlin today, but there are some schools that I won't get to for a while. So we wanted to make sure that everyone had some information at the same time, and that then I could follow up with a face-to-face, more detailed presentation. So that broad communication did go out today.
So the good news is that there are some districts who are getting hit a lot harder than we are with these adjustments in funding over this past year. We do have a dip because of the change in the levy. Fortunately, we're going to make that back up next year and then in the following years. So this is going to be a little bit of a rough spot that we have to get through. I like the approach that you've suggested here. We're going to protect people because we're going to need those people at some point, and where we can and where it makes sense, I think we need to do that because we're going to be hiring them back at some point, and probably not in the near future. So protecting programs, keeping it as close to the students as we can, I think this all makes sense to me, so I like the way you've looked at this. I think you've put some thought into it, and I don't know what else we could add. I mean, we can certainly have that discussion as a board, but board members, this is your chance.
I just have a couple comments. I appreciate the approach as well. It seems somewhat providential that we've been looking at this. I know Mr. Hebden's already last year when he started, we met with him, and we met with him again regarding these changes, and we're already kind of reevaluating if there are some areas where we can tighten things, and I think that's again, that was somewhat providential that this is an opportunity to do that. Certainly some of those things we wouldn't want just for the year where we're having this kind of budget drop, but that we can implement going forward. That can save us money. Certainly a question many would have, and that I crossed my mind too, okay, if this is a one-year thing, do we dip into our rainy day fund and say, well, you know what, we probably don't need any changes, let's just go into our reserves. And but Mr. Hebden pointed out that our reserves, even though they seem like a high number, I think it was around $12 or $13 million, which is about 5% of our operating budget. That doesn't even cover 1 month of payroll. So if you are into financial recommendations, certainly as a family, you're recommended to have 3 to 6 months of, so really, that's not that much for an organization that large.
So I'll just a quick anecdote about that. So maybe it was like 2010. It was my very first year at the district office, and I was actually the HR director. And at the time, Superintendent Hill called me, and I'd literally been in the job for like 4 minutes. It was my first day. Like I didn't really know where my office was. She calls me and she says, "Hey, we're on the brink of a government shutdown. I need, you're not getting state apportionment, and I need you to figure out how you're going to make payroll." And I literally left her office, and I'm thinking, what is state apportionment? I don't even know what that is. And am I in charge of payroll? Like I literally, and so I asked Mr. Hebden in preparation for answering questions about the reserve, what is 1 month payroll for Pasco School District? And our 1 month payroll for Pasco School District is $17.1 million. So the 5% reserve that you designate as a board for us to have in reserve is $12.9 million. So we would be short in making payroll for 1 month payroll. So crisis averted my first year as HR. The government shutdown didn't happen, but certainly, I was definitely sweating it, how we were going to make that happen.
Yeah, that's, and if people don't think this is possible, it absolutely is. Look up the many cities across our country that literally went bankrupt. And so, I mean, it absolutely does happen. We're not protected just because we are funded by taxpayer money to a large degree. So this is something that absolutely can happen to communities. I would make one request. This seems like a good opportunity for our legislative advocate, Ms. Sullivan. Is that right? We haven't seen her for a little while, but this really bothers me that the state, the way they approach us, last year we had a bargaining year, and so we're asked as a board to, support some sort of bargaining. The district goes through that process and we approve a new contract. Well, then the state, literally within 6 to 12 months, they meet now and they literally change how things are being funded, and these things affect what we've just agreed to do, and it just is so convoluted that they can do that. Like, we really need them to plan ahead so that this type of change that they're doing right now, that some of this would be very firmly decided years in advance, not we're still wondering, at the end of the session, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to, change some of these numbers? So I would really like to see our state and national government, for that matter, really change the way they work in these areas, because it's maddening for local school boards and school districts to operate in a system like that with so many uncertainties when we're asked to then have agreements with large unions, teachers unions, and classified staff unions, and we don't really know what's coming. So just a thought.
That is an interesting conversation to have. So I think this is a challenge. I mean, we thought we had it figured out this year, and even going forward. We knew there was going to be a dip because this affects everybody with a change in levy and the change in funding, but now they're tinkering with it again, potentially changing the amount that we can go and ask our local communities in a levy. And they're potentially changing the amount of local effort assistance, which is the additional for districts of low property value. And so all of these things will impact us. And so I think it might be worth, we can talk to Marie and she can talk to the legislators that she knows, but it would probably be more effective if we, maybe as a district, submitted a legislative position that asked for more stability in funding and not making such drastic changes and tinkering with it so much. And where if we get all of WASDA to support something like that, we would probably be more effective. And so we can do something like that. And now's the time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I know you bring up that when we have the things, and certainly I didn't think of it then, or we've talked about similar things,
right.
But it's becoming more apparent now that there's so much fear and issues with districts, and so that's a great idea to approach it that way. And you're right, they did give us some heads up, but again, it's not that specific, and we have to make a very specific contractual agreement with the union, so we don't have the leniency to say, give or take $10 million if the state decides to do something, so.
The good news, again, is we're in a good position. It's not, our funding does drop, but I think we found ways that we can get through it. There's other districts that aren't so fortunate, but they're making changes now that will affect us. And they're talking about raising the levy lid. Now, not that we need to go and ask our voters for more money now. I mean, we went out 4 years with that. And it could potentially put us at a disadvantage if they go and raise it again, and now we're locked into a 4-year levy. Not that we couldn't make those adjustments, but anyway, it's just frustrating when they start monkeying with things.
I think one of the approaches that I was remiss in leaving, and I left it out and I shouldn't have, is one of the things that we've done is identify dollars in this year's budget to carry over as well to offset the impacts. So that was an approach that I was remiss in mentioning to the board. I also just really wanted to capitalize on your comment and kind of exclamation point and underline it, that while next year's budgeting process triggered us to look at our budget differently, there are efficiencies that we have identified that should be and will be long-term policy changes. So, there'll be some things that we do just to quote-unquote get through next year because it's a tight year. There will be some things that will be a policy change long-term because we're recognizing where those budget efficiencies are, and there's just policies and practices that we need to change long-term. So, there's a silver lining to everything, and so the silver lining to this is it really does create the urgency for us to do that, and then we can sustain those really, those deep best practices around budget efficiency. So I just wanted to highlight and kind of underscore that, an exclamation point, that some of the changes we make will be 1 year, but some of them will be more medium term and long term as well.
And I loved what you said earlier about, asking everyone to cut a little bit from their budgets, just a little bit. When I was building a house, that's what I did. I had 35. I acted as general contractor, and I had 35 different subs. And I decided if I cut $200 from each one, that I would save $7,000. We're kind of taking that approach, and when you do that, it kind of keeps you honest instead of, oh my goodness, I'd really like that faucet, but really this one's sufficient. Now that we're living in the house, I don't miss any of it, and I ended up coming up in $25,000 under budget for my house, which is unheard of. It was a good time to build, by the way. But the fact is sometimes those things do keep us honest, and sometimes they might make us cut out that morning coffee or the fast food or whatever it does. But in the end, it actually makes things better. And I honestly think this might be a blessing in the long run. It's 1 year. It's tightening the belt a little bit. We are in so much better financial position than many others in our area that are having some pretty major problems. This doesn't scare me because I have perfect confidence in what we're doing. And honestly, I think it might be a blessing in the long run. So I have perfect confidence in this going forward. And I appreciate the financial planning that we've done to make this less impactful at this point. I also think that there's so much pressure because there are so many school districts that hopefully this won't be as bad as this. But I think it'll be enough that it'll help keep us honest. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I love that we're going out to the teachers ahead of time. Honestly, I think, and not just the teachers, the whole district staff. Honestly, I love this proactive way about doing it. Yeah, it might be different, but I think as employees, that they have a right to know what's going on at a little bit different level, and having some of this information in advance, knowing it might change, is okay. It helps people feel more confident and no matter what happens. So I applaud you for going out in advance and not waiting until numbers are final, and I think this is great. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And I just want to acknowledge Scott Wilson, Maria Lee, and district staff who helped vet the first presentation around how do we really drill down the presentation that's going to teachers so that it's simple. And then the PSE leadership that I met with today was hugely supportive too. So thank you for that. As a superintendent, you don't do anything in isolation, and I appreciate having a phenomenal team of broad stakeholders to be able to kind of check my thinking through and say, help me think this through, what am I missing? And so I feel very, very grateful to work with a phenomenal team.
Okay, is there any other?
I was just going to say, thank you for the report, and the approach seems sound. Appreciate you guys taking time also to reach out to the board prior to this meeting, and we didn't have any questions or recommendations that that I heard, but I think maybe each of us had some questions. I don't think I had any recommendations, but I appreciated the chance to better understand it and talk to Mr. Hebden and Ms. Whitney prior to the meeting to better understand the situation we're in. And it'll be interesting to continue to monitor, watch, and understand, and look forward to the future reports as the picture becomes more clear.
Thank you, Scott. And if, as board members, you have things you want me to consider or questions in the interim, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. All right, just a continuation of our budget discussions. We're on number 2 of our series of budget presentations. Tonight we'll talk a little bit about the prototypical school funding model. I think it's a great opportunity now as we're talking about all this legislation and how do we receive our money, what's it attached to. So we'd like to talk a little bit about that. Just a brief introduction. A reminder of the path that we are on. Last board meeting we were together, we talked a little bit about the Government Finance Officers Association and our involvement there in best practices around school district budgeting. And again, tonight's presentation will be the prototypical school funding model. And then we've got a couple other items in future agendas throughout the end of May, ending with the PASCO prototypical school funding model. And again, just a way to educate all of us, the community, board, staff, through this budget process. What is the prototypical school funding model? The state uses this model to allocate funds to districts throughout the state. And it was implemented in September of 2012. It includes staffing units, prescribed staffing units for all 3 grade clusters, elementary, middle, and high schools. And then it provides prescribed staffing units for district-wide support, CTE, LAP high poverty, and a transitional bilingual program, and high cap. They allocate funds based on those staffing units at a set amount for salaries, insurance, payroll taxes, benefits, and professional development, just to name a few. And then they also allocate funds for materials, supplies, and operating costs, known as MSOCs. All of these allocations of funding and staffing units are based on student enrollment, full-time equivalent enrollment. Just to give you a quick idea, they set that a prototypical school would have 400 students at an elementary level, 432, and 600 at high school, and then a district-wide would have 1,000. And that's not saying that that's their suggested size of an elementary, middle, or high school. That's just how they've decided to allocate the units, the staffing units, according to those. And then for us, it would come to us at a prorated amount. So if we had a school of 600 in an elementary, we would get 1.8 or whatever that comes out to be in the math for a principal. So on and so forth. Those are the teachers and the other staffing units that the state says they will fund, and then they apply the associated salaries, benefits, all of those things to those staffing units. A little different spin on this is to put, okay, how many students does it take to generate just one principal at the elementary school? That'd be 319, so on and so forth through the various staffing positions. We'd need 23,529 students to generate one psychologist according to the prototypical school funding model. Then if you're looking at the middle school, similar numbers there. Again, psychologist is a little bit crazy there. Nurses and so on and so forth, just to give you an idea what it looks like. And then this is what the high school looks like. And again, ours is based on our actual enrollment and those assignments of staffing units and then the associated dollars that come to that. So then the question is, well, does the state allocation model truly align with our students' needs and our community priorities? And the answer is no. We believe that 23,000 students to generate one psychologist is not adequate, or nurses and things like that. So throughout this process, I mentioned the Pasco prototypical school funding model. We'll dive into that as our final presentation in this budget series, and in that we'll show what we have identified as Pasco as what is our adequate amount. Another example is we receive funding for 3 nurses for the whole district, but as a district we've said no, we'd like to have one we need to have one in every building, so we fund 20 of those from our local dollars. So just some food for thought. Hopefully that sheds some light on what is the prototypical school funding model, where does our apportionment or money come from the state, and how is that generated, and also emphasizes the importance of our enrollment as we move through the budget process. At this point, I'd entertain any questions that you might have related to the prototypical school funding model.
Thank you, Mr. Hebden. It's your chance, board members, if you have any questions. Well, I can tell you, I'm looking forward to see how the Pasco prototypical school funding model aligns to the state funding model. I'm guessing that's quite a bit different. So looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is another area where I think, WASDA could help us. I know that this has been on their radar for a while. I mean, I don't know how, especially with the psychologists, they play an important part of the IEPs. Like, to me, legally, I don't even see how they can get by with that, because we have more students that need IEPs than ever. So I don't even see how that legally is how you can defend that. And then obviously with the nurses, we have, if you just look at a small group of kids with asthma, diabetes, food allergies, to say that you can just train someone to hopefully manage that with just supervision of 3 nurses for our 23 school. I mean, that's just not even safe. So I'd like to see us make some progress on that. I think that's an area where we could convince the legislators if we explain some of those things. I'm sure people have tried, but I think we can. That's an area ripe for improvement.
And in the presentation that Superintendent Whitney's talking about and taking out to the schools, there is small pieces that the legislation is looking at around counselors and special ed. So there is somewhat small movement towards adding funding or FTE to that in the prototypical school funding model, but it is very, very small. But yes, that would be a good message.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Hebden, and thank you, Mrs. Whitney, for your presentations on our funding. All right, so looks like we are moving down to future agenda items, and I think one of the things that we can include on here that we should add to this is a discussion on STEM schools. I mean, just put that on our list somewhere. Doesn't need to be next meeting, but just on our placeholder.
Okay.
So do you have anything else you want to talk about the future agenda yet?
So I almost can't believe it's May. So for the first board meeting in May, we have a data dashboard demonstration that is scheduled. So this is an opportunity for you as a board to kind of dig into the tool that Mark presented. It's been some months back now, Mark. Or it feels like some months back. Anyway, so you're going to get the opportunity to do some kind of a hands-on kind of digging into that data dashboard. During the board meeting, we'll have a report on the Hanover retention study. That was a board-requested audit that was also done, and we'd been waiting, and it's finally completed, so we'll have that in front of you. Randy is going to do an extended study on our construction projects updates. There's lots of celebrations there about the progress of the buildings, and he'll also be able to talk to you about kind of a follow-up to the cost escalation savings plan that he had, so he has some celebrations to share with you there. Kevin will continue his budget series with a riveting presentation around the changes of levy and levy equalization. And then we will be bringing back middle school for naming recommendations for action.
Okay, so that's 3 weeks. I think we have an extra week. We have an extra week between meetings, so. Okay, moving on to agenda item 13, communications. So, Mr. Lehrman, would you like to start?
Yep. I'll be pretty brief. Thanks for sticking around here with us. For those of you that are regulars, we haven't seen you in a month because we had a great board study session, not study session, but retreat 2 weeks ago. It was an open public meeting also, so anyone was welcome to come there, but thanks to board leadership for setting that up. We had a great session with some open and honest dialogue about where we've been in the last year, where we're going, and the facilitation of that meeting by an outside facilitator really helped us have some valuable conversations, I believe.
Yes, I'll agree. I'll pass.
So this school year, I've been attending events at schools throughout the year, and last week I attended the book fair at McClintock and was able to see a lot of friendly faces, and actually decided, since I was going to be visiting that I would just volunteer at it. So I was the guard at the library entry, and I think the book fairs are exciting because every child enjoys having a new book, especially if it's their own, and especially if they've picked it out, and so it's always exciting to see kids be able to find something that interests them and that gets them excited about reading. And the majority of these students were there with the parent. It was after school on Wednesday that I went, and just to see that family excitement around reading was really positive. And so hopefully we have those types of events at most of our schools, and I know we do.
I hope everyone had a nice spring break and Easter with their families. And I also can't believe that May is next week. So it's crazy to see how fast this year has gone. And before you know it, me, Cassidy, and Alpha will be walking the stage, which is so crazy to think about.
The past few weeks, Tijuana had their Every 15 Minutes program. And I've got to kind of see it as I've been in high school, but being a senior was especially special. And it was just a great opportunity, and I learned so much. I think it's just a wonderful and really impactful program.
This board retreat, I think we're going to make a regular part of business, so I'm sure you're all sad that we're going to have one less board meeting in April, but it was probably one of the better board retreats that I've ever been to. I was really, really encouraged by the things that we've learned, the progress we've made, and the places that we're going, the places that this district is going. So it was an exciting time to learn and grow, and it seems like the whole district is growing in the same way, and it's been fun to watch.
So I think we did learn one thing at the board retreat, and that's that we need to schedule more time for a board retreat when we schedule them. Lots of discussion that would have been nice if we had more time to explore. A week ago, I went to the WASDA board meeting, and I can tell you there's a lot of exciting things happening in WASDA. I think Tim Garshaw, who is our executive director for WASDA, I think is doing some good things for us, not only our state, but at the national organization as well. They're doing some things that I think will really be helpful for us. So he's doing a great job for us. I just want to report that. And Jessica Vavris, who is our legislative liaison, is also just doing an outstanding job there. And we have regional meeting coming up on the 9th, I believe. So those who are interested, the regional meeting this time will be in College Place I guess it's College Place, near Walla Walla. That's, and I think that's it.
So I just wanted to one more time say I love our deaf education program. And I also wanted to recognize, I had the most phenomenal classroom visit to Julia Call. She is our teacher of students who have been diagnosed with behavior disorders. So these are elementary students who have been unsuccessful in the environments in their home elementary because of the impact of their behavior and qualify for specially designed instruction under that umbrella. The program is housed at Longfellow, and I just happened to go to Longfellow one morning this week, and she's standing in the hall. She come see what we're doing. And so I go in, and they're using train sets, the like old kind of wooden train sets, to learn about how to build community and share. And they've created these rules, these community rules about how we interact around these train sets. So if you can imagine, these are 8 to 10 students who've been unsuccessful in their home elementaries, all in the same classroom, learning about how we interact with one another through these trains. So I'm a little bit full of anecdotes tonight. So I had this train set at home that we had purchased for another purpose and chose not to use it for that purpose. So I dropped the train set off to her and said, hey, you introduce this to your class when you're ready or not. It's up to you. Do what you want with it. So she sent me the most beautiful picture today of the kids playing with that train set, and they had figured out how to all put it together. So I guess I tell that story in the heaviness of budget cuts and what can be a really high stress and a tension-filled job, both as district staff and I'm sure as board members as we're moving through this. There's a heart and core of why we do this work that happens every day and that is completely unaware of the budget cuts, and that for me is the thing that fills my bucket. And in those really hard moments, and I wonder, can I hit this out of the park today? And I think about the kids in Mrs. Cole's class that are hitting it out of the park, and I know that she's making a difference every day, and the things that we do make a difference. So it was an inspiration to me this week, and I offer that story to you if you need one too. So with that, we are requesting an executive session under 4231.10.1G for personnel superintendent evaluation.
And with that, we will recess into executive session. Thank you for attending tonight.